Things are always working out for me. I like that. You've talked about how we pick up some beliefs that don't serve us, how as we bump along our trail, we learn lessons from our parents, from other adults. Talk about how everything you want is because you think in the having of it, you'll feel better. And so when we're younger, we pick up some habits that now in retrospect as adults don't serve us, but at the time, they helped us to get through.
Well, let us say something clear here. We want to say that every comparative experience does serve you, because in knowing what you don't want, you know what you do want. So let's say that everything does serve you in the clarification and in the choosing process. But once you have identified what the sweet spot feels like and what the sour spot feels like, so to speak, once you've identified what feels good, then it's prudent to keep practicing that. And when we say that you have beliefs that don't serve you, that's because you've practiced the thoughts that don't feel good. You keep thinking the thoughts that don't feel good. It wasn't that they felt good and they felt good and they felt good and then they turned on you. It was never like that. They never felt good. They never felt good. But until they feel really terrible, most people don't try to change them. That's why we say if you've got negative emotion and you don't do something about it, don't worry, it'll get bigger. Until pretty soon you'll recognize it, but then there's enough momentum in it that it's harder to let go of because law of attraction is delivering so much around it.
So as a child, you change your behavior so that you don't get yelled at.
Yeah, because instead of utilizing your own guidance system that's calling you to your own desire, you're using someone else's guidance. You're using your parents as guidance because they're trying to control the condition because they don't know, we love them very much, or care about your sweet spot.
Yes.
Your inner being does, but your parents care about the mess you made.
Yes. And so you have this sort of misguidance that you learned from your parents. And so now and
let's call it understandable misguidance, because your physical senses, it's easier to notice an angry or loving parent than it is to feel the emotion of your closing or widening of your gap.
Of your own guidance.
So again, it's that the reality is just so compelling. That's why now, all these years later, we're trying to get you to tune to your sweet spot instead of to your approval-seeking mode.
And so that gets right to the nub of my question.
Yes.
How do you identify when you've got these competing beliefs, the ones that you've learned, that if I make this choice, I won't be confronted with these other people's opinions? And
well, here's the thing.
The true me.
We just have to give it to you. You're always going to be confronted with other people's opinions because other people's opinions are important to them and they're working very hard to make their opinions important to you. So you're always going to be confronted with other people's opinions. But once you've tasted the sweet spot and tasted the sweet spot and tasted the sweet spot, after a while, you'll be able to look at any of them and say, I prefer my sweet spot to your opinion. Which is a nicer way of saying, I don't give a rip what you want. I prefer my alignment to trying to soothe a condition for you. I do you a disservice. As I jump through hoops to find your approval, I'm actually teaching you the opposite of finding your own guidance. So you're always going to need to be in control of conditions and other people in order to be happy. You don't serve anybody by trying to be their sweet spot. Esther has been learning that big time in a whole avalanche of experiences where she didn't even realize how much she cared about the well-being of others and how much she was trying to be their path of least resistance to their happiness. And we began saying to Esther, you know, that bites you in the butt 100% of the time. Because you cannot be someone else's path of least resistance. And when you try, Jerry used to tell a story. He was, for a time, in Cuba as part of a circus. And there was a big lion and a big cage. And the lion had a big, deep purr. And Jerry discovered that he could put his hand in the cage and he could scratch that lion right behind his ear. And as he would do that, the lion would close his eyes and purr. It was such a nice experience. But Jerry learned that when he first had the thought that he was going to remove his hand from the cage, that he needed to remove his hand in the moment that he had the thought, because the lion was telepathic. And when he knew that Jerry was going to remove his hand, the lion would then try to bite Jerry's hand, because he never wanted this to stop. And so it's sort of the same thing with so many people that you're interacting with. When you've been scratching them behind the ear in a way that helps them to feel better, they never want it to stop. And there's a limit to how many ears you can scratch. They need to be self-sustaining in time.
Yes, and when you've been scratching for hours and you start to get hungry, you have to, recognize
selfish person,
whether or not you're going to go eat
How
or lose
dare
your
you?
hand.
How dare you serve yourself when you have trained me to require your service? And so, as you find your sweet spot, you inspire others to find theirs, and then everyone begins to discover that they are all self-sustained, that they all have access to the same alignment, that receptive mode will feed them all, you see.
Sort of the light bulb for this little vision that I had today of myself sailing up the west coast and down through the Alaskan islands. The solution to those other things is just focusing on that feeling.
Yeah.
And letting that be my guidance.
Whatever it takes to find that sweet spot, because you must accept this premise. Life has already caused you to do the asking. Step one is taken care of. Your vortex is full and ripe with all manner of things that are important to you. Step two has already been answered, because source and law of attraction have already gathered all of the cooperative components, and they are there for you to realize them. They are already being revealed to you, but they are there for you to do step three, which is get into the receptive mode so that you can get this idea and this one and this one and this one and this one. That's what happily ever after is, you see. Never being angry with yourself about where you stand. Always being appreciative that where you stand has caused you to reach for more. And always be mindfully flowing forward in the eternal unfolding that is you see, and allowing everyone else to do the same.